because it was common knowledge that Indians could not control a vehicle at a speed higher than 30 miles an hour. So we have come a long, long way. And when I look at all of the legislation which is now on the books, we have equality legislation, we have anti-racial discrimination legislation, we have anti-religious discrimination legislation, all on the books, and it's all because of the presence of immigrants in this country, which have required those issues to be addressed, and addressed in a manner which I think has enriched all of us and the society that we live in. So I'm going to turn now to a very specific incident. We, as a Hindu community, we have a reputation for being fairly reserved, withdrawn. We don't make a lot of noise, and we're fairly well integrated. We are often touted as the poster child for integration. And 2 years ago, I was dragged into this space because, and I will be specific, because we were assaulted by members of the Church of England in a public space. It was a targeted act of persecution against a minority religion. Those of you who have seen the video that's on the National Council of Hindu Temples website may have seen how Lord Harries used parliamentary privilege to denigrate a wholly peaceful and fully integrated, tranquil community. And within a matter of months, we were painted as dowry-grabbing, female infanticide-supporting heathens. This is part of a practice which, since it started 2 years ago, does not appear to have diminished. So let me tell you what we did and our interaction, our learning about what the reality of the interfaith community is, the interfaith sector is in this particular country. We went to Archbishop Justin Welby and said, this has happened, it's appalling, can we have some way forward? And we were given a letter which was written to the minister, and the letter that was given to us said this: we also noted that Lord Harries was acting in a private capacity and not on behalf of any of the British churches. So to a large degree, they convinced us that actually Lambeth Palace was not complicit in this, that Lord Harries was a bit of a rogue and had no official sanction. And so we asked them for a public condemnation of the fact that he falsified and presented incorrect data and misinterpreted the evidence that he had in his hand. And we asked for a condemnation for that. And we said, this is the faith community. We have the highest ideals. Thou shalt not bear false witness, etc., etc. Let's live the reality of it. And they refused to give it to us. And we said, okay, never mind. We'll just take that on the chin and let's move forward. We proceeded with the EHRC, the Equalities and Human Rights Commission. They were given, I think, about £45,000 by the government to conduct an investigation into this particular issue, caste legislation as it was. And they started their investigation by appointing persons who were already on record as having very fixed views about what the whole issue was. And they called a consultation. We, as the National Council of Hindu Temples, the largest democratically selected body of Hindus in this country, we were not invited to the consultation. We did find out about it, and so I sent a letter saying we should be turning up. And so we were present, we engaged fully, and we presented information to the EHRC for them to consider the counter perspective that was being presented to them. None of that information appeared in the final report and the final recommendations. It was completely ignored in its entirety. So we thought, okay, this is the reality of interfaith, and now we're negotiating with government. Let's carry on and see where this leads us. Then, only a couple of weeks ago, an organisation which is funded, supported by Christian fundamentalist extremists engaged in evangelism. It's quite funny because evangelism is a positive word from the perspective of the dominant faith, but from our perspective, evangelism is radicalisation plus cultural genocide combined in one. So when we look at extremists, we see them in many places that perhaps the domestic community would not see them as extremists. So this particular organisation, VODI, they filed their annual return with Companies House, and they state this: Lambeth Palace meeting, meetings with Lord Bishop Richard Harries, and participation in the Conference on Poverty in London. This led to a meeting for us and other representatives at Lambeth Palace with Canon Toby Howarth. He said that unfortunately they did not have an appropriate desk, but that the Church of England supports the caste legislation, which could be seen clearly through Bishop Lord Harries, one of the main persons driving the course of the legislation. So now we have two conflicting statements. One that is purporting to support us and is saying to the ministers, you must have consultation and this is inappropriate. The letters are available on our website, by the way, they're fully published. And the second, actually reporting that the Church of England is fully engaged with the Dalit Christian movement in undermining traditional Hindu practices. So we're now thinking, right, this is the reality of interfaith. Is this actually what we are facing in this country? And it has to be addressed, because all of our talks about the outer policies and the wonderful pamphlets and everything else, they are meaningless if in our personal practices and our personal exercise of religious beliefs, we don't adhere to the highest beliefs. So yes, I'm more than happy to say, in our experience, the Church of England, Lambeth Palace, cannot be entrusted. They are not fit custodians of interfaith harmony in this country. They are poachers masquerading as gamekeepers, and from my perspective, remember, gamekeepers are also not very good for game. Ultimately, game meets an untimely end. So we have to move as a group of people who want to live in this country, who want to enjoy human rights. We have to move the establishment forward, civilise them. We have to bring them into the 21st century and actually engage on a genuine, open, fearless, courageous talking dialogue. This has been going on ever since religion began. And the only way forward is to look at the complete and utter nonsense which is in many scriptures and discard it in preference for human rights. It's so simple and so straightforward. And yet, those whose vested interests lie in maintaining friction between communities so that they themselves can perpetuate their own organisations, we have to challenge that. So when I see a document being produced and sent saying that this organisation, which has an appalling record on its own self-regulation, on pastoral care, we had a conference where one of, our colleagues said that it should not be entrusted with its own self-disciplinary processes. This organisation appealing and preparing the groundwork for approaching government and saying, give us lots more money so we can spread our tentacles nationally, so that we can do more of what we've been doing so well for so long. It strikes fear into my heart as a member of a minority religion in this particular country. I'm going to conclude. There's so much more, but I'm not going to say much more. I think I've probably said too much already, but I'm going to conclude with a small paragraph from one of my favourite scriptures. And every time I meet somebody who is overly religious, and boy are there a lot of them in this interfaith community, this comes back to me and it helps keep me on a straight and narrow. And this little paragraph, I think, may resonate. In these persons, the devil often increases the fervour that they have and the desire to perform these and other works more frequently, so that their pride and presumption may grow greater. For the devil knows quite well that all these works and virtues which they perform are not only valueless to them, but even become vices in them. And such a degree of evil are some of these persons wont to reach, that they would have none appear good save themselves. And thus in deed and word, whenever the opportunity occurs, they condemn them and slander them, beholding the mote in their brother's eye, and not considering the beam which is in their own. They strain at another's gnat, and themselves swallow a camel. And speaking on behalf of the Hindu community, which recently has been subjected to yoga is a product of Satan, to India is the rape nation of the world, even though the statistics for the European countries, almost all of the European countries, are horrifically in excess of. And despite the problem that in this country we have an issue with child abuse, with sex abuse, and institutionalized abuse, taking all of those things into account, I would suggest to you that we, as a group of people wanting to live together, should just go back to the basics. We have it's like a tale of two cities. We have two cities. In the grassroots, people get on. They do the work with their life experience, with the friendships they create. They actually evolve beyond the dogmatic rubbish that's often force-fed in childhood, and they evolve into harmonious communities. The second city is the moment you get into these religious institutions, where I have met the most deceitful, the most untrustworthy people imaginable, supposedly representing and acting in the sphere of divinity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Satish. There is you'll excuse the analogy, a proverbial bone to chew on. We now have some room and some time to interact further, and I see some of the same hands, but we're going to have to move around the room and see and listen to some new voices as well. So if I could start counterintuitively at the back and work forward. Yes.
Sure. Rakesh Shah, International Society of Krishna Consciousness, known as the Hare Krishnas. I see in this room that there's a lot of people, and one of the things I think that really needs to be defined is what does interfaith really mean? Unless we have a clear definition of what interfaith is and what somebody has to do to be a good interfaith person, it's very hard to move this forward. And secondly, most of the people in this room are probably, without being very rude, above the age of 40. So the power of influence in our society with the youth is very limited. So if we don't have strong role models, we don't identify who the strong role models are, and put them forward so that people can see what people should be like who are good people, who are good integrated people, it's very hard to move all this argument forward. So we need to very much engage with people that are much younger within the communities, on both the cultural and on the spiritual level. And secondly, we need to really define what it means to be a person of good interfaith.
Thank you for that contribution. Would any of our speakers like to address the central issue about engaging with youth?
Sorry, hello Rakesh. This thing about interfaith and the necessity for role models, actually, I'm totally against the whole interfaith sector and against organised religious institutions. I think humanity can get on itself quite well enough and grow itself quite well enough. What we really need is Christians to be true to their 10 commandments. We need Hindus to be true to their Upanishads. We need Buddhists to be true to their own texts, and the same with Muslims to be true to theirs. If that's the case, then we genuinely have an opportunity to engage. Otherwise, I think it's all smoke and mirrors. Sometimes I think the interfaith industry is the greatest Ponzi scheme, peddling subprime spirituality, just moving from one person to the next. But we don't need it. I don't believe that we need it for a moment.
Thank you. Any of our other speakers wish to comment on that particular strand?
Yes, on the youth issue, that is more open to entryism than any other, because youth are very impressionable. And within the Jewish community, the diverse youth movements have over recent years been steadily taken over by these various entryist tendencies. And moreover, entries within the Jewish community are increasingly pressing for representation via this or that or the other category, trying to move us away from representation by majority to we need more women, we need more under 35s. Now, I recognise this from Marxist entryism. We need lesbians and gays, etc., etc. And when you have those systems, the people who represent these supposed subgroups, who don't all think alike, always tend to be representatives of the entryists. So I think just thinking, well, youth is the answer, no. Do you know what's most popular with the British public today? Baking contests, song contests, doing up your home. And up to a point, I really feel very, very sympathetic to what Satish says. We don't nationally need interfaith communities because some of the way they're going is creating more conflict, not less. And there is no greater example of that, in my view, than coming up and saying, none of this has anything to do with Islam. I mean, people are not fools. Islamist extremism may be a very, very tiny minority and a very sort of obscure origin version of Islam, but it's certainly a version of Islam. So one of the reasons the public gets turned off, which is what we were hearing earlier, is that government is all too ready to allow these self-appointed groups to define public discourse in ways that the public absolutely rejects. And that again allows for people like Russell Brand to come into the public sphere and say, you're being fed a load of lies.
Chair?
And, government money should not be helping this along.
Okay. Mohammed.
I just want to speak up in defence of my Christian brethren just for a bit. But I think one of the things that we've seen in relation to the National Interfaith Network, which is actually an extremely problematic organisation for a number of reasons, is it's actually the Christians that took a stand. I mean, we sort of rocked the boat and we raised concerns but over recent months, the Interfaith Network has seen the resignation of its Christian co-chair, Bob Fife, who's the chair of Christians Together in Britain and Ireland, the national ecumenical body for the churches, and the resignation of a Free Church representative, a good friend of mine, and also the representative from the Catholic Bishops' Conference. So this clearly indicates that the Interfaith Network for the United Kingdom, which is 80% funded by you and me, by the taxpayer, is in trouble because it has experienced a significant loss of confidence from the most powerful and the most significant faith communities in this country. So there are Christians who've taken a principled stand in relation to this. However, like any organisation or movement that is dependent on money, people don't fight it any more viciously than they do when it's all about money and access to taxpayers' money. There is kind of a rearguard action in play, and it certainly concerns me that it's as though the hawks have taken over the nest, and we're moving even further in the direction of embracing the entryists. The Islamists have played a good game here. And the Interfaith Network is even more in bed with the Muslim Council of Britain and Islamist bodies. I should draw to your attention, just echoing the comments by Judy and other friends, 2 surveys conducted by the Policy Exchange and Channel 4, I think it's 2006-2007, showed that only between 4 and 6% of British Muslims recognise the MCB, the Muslim Council of Britain, as speaking for them in any way, shape or form. And yet, these are the organisations that have muscled their way into the front of the queue when it comes to representation and speaking on my behalf, on behalf of all of us in a Muslim background in relation to the IFN and the Christian Muslim Forum and so forth. It worries me deeply that where in I think it's 2013 we had a multi-faith petition published on Harry's Place with Jewish signatures, Christian signatures, Muslim signatures, Buddhist signatures, Hindu signatures, appealing to the Jewish community leadership in respect of the fact that the Board of Deputies had given some kind of endorsement or colluded with the Joseph Interfaith Foundation's interreligious partnership with the East London Mosque, whose senior imam was a signatory, has been a signatory, is named as a signatory, as indeed has been one of the Deputy Secretary Generals of the MCB, to the virulently anti-Semitic, virulently hate-filled Istanbul Declaration of 2009 that caused the then Labour government in Hazel Bliss to sever all ties with the MCB. And yet through interfaith, these Islamist political parties are able to obtain a back route into power and influence, and it deeply concerns me that those who collude with these organisations on the non-Muslim side are themselves in a cause of seeking to represent and to have access to money that they may be, from what other colleagues are saying, they may not be entitled to, because they don't necessarily speak for those communities any more than the MCB speaks for Muslims.
Yeah, Damien.
Well, I'm so surprised to hear such counterintuitive and encouraging thoughts at what I imagined was a sort of interfaith gathering. One of the messages I'm taking away, or a message I'd like to put across, is, in my opinion, interfaith dialogue is a waste of time. And that if every interfaith dialogue was cancelled tomorrow for the next year, it would not be the slightest detrimental effect to relations between the faiths. I'm not saying that no good comes out of such dialogue. Yes, it does, but also harm can come out of some such dialogue, and we've heard specific examples of how the Board of Deputies has been manipulated, and how the Muslim Council of Britain has managed to manipulate government. And I'm not surprised that they're manipulating government, because what you have here is a very nasty intertwining of fanatical entryism and the public sector mentality, which we've seen before in the political sphere. Let's put this into an international context. Interfaith dialogue has done absolutely nothing to stop the growth of religious radicalism around the world, which I think is a deep and complex process that can't just be brushed away with thoughts about good extremists and bad extremists and good people of faith. Just to mention, Satish, first of all, I liked your point about the benefits of different communities living together. I live in Notting Hill, where all sorts of different ethnic communities converge, and I think that's the reason I like living there. But I don't think of it as a multicultural, diverse society, because once I do that, it becomes sort of patronising and artificial and horrible. But you did mention India. You did mention your run-in with the Church of England. You mentioned Christian evangelists in India, and I'm not remotely defending some of the things that fundamentalist Christian fanatics do around the world. But as part of the worldwide resurgence of religious radicalism, let's call it that, because fundamentalism is not necessarily the right word, what we're seeing in India is a growth of Hindu radicalism that has undoubtedly and demonstrably led to an increase in the persecution of Christians and also the persecution of Muslims in some parts of the world. We're also seeing the persecution of, it's not tosh actually.
It is.
It happens on both sides. Muslim villages have been I will supply you with it. I will supply you with the data. I will supply you with every chapter and verse.
With all due
I think
respect.
what you'll find is that I'm not saying that Muslim persecution of Hindus is the greatest source of religious tension in the world today. Clearly it is not. Clearly Islam is the most persecuting religion in the world today. What I am saying is that around the world, if you look at Sri Lanka, for example, you will find Buddhist nationalists and fanatics who give Hindus and Muslims and Christians a very hard time. You will find this all over the world. I needn't expand on the point. What I'm saying is that there's a radicalization of religious groups, which most certainly includes Hindu radicals, who can, in some places, be persecutors themselves, and that this worldwide disruption is not being addressed by our comfortable, platitudinous interfaith dialogue.
We sort of want to move on to a further question, but Satish, you were wanting to make a point. Can you make it very
I can do very, very
succinctly?
quickly. And it was actually a continuation of something Mohammed said about the Interfaith Network. And being a person who was brought up professionally to charge for 15 minutes of time in increments, I place a huge value on the amount of time that things take. My interaction with the Interfaith Network was, it came to my mind. I was last week at the Gandhi Memorial statue when they were unveiling it. And I'll share an incident with you. I took a photograph of the statue, uploaded it onto Facebook, and sent it out with a comment saying, Bapu can now keep an eye on Parliament. Okay? So I sent it out in the Twitter sphere, and immediately I got a response back from a gentleman who I was shocked and surprised had picked it up. On the stage, there was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson standing there delivering his speech, and on my phone, Nathuram Godse's grandnephew came on. He was the chap who shot Mahatma Gandhi, right? And so I'm having a dialogue with an incredible combination of people. This is the world that we live in today. This is the speed with which things can be done today. I submitted an application to the Interfaith Network last year requesting for a charity wanting to engage in Hindu and Muslim dialogue and to try and bridge that barrier. And we were told, well, it couldn't really be reviewed until the AGM next year. Right? So there are means in which you destroy initiatives under the banner of interfaith with absolutely no intention of allowing the status quo to change. And this notion that interfaith dialogue has not worked, I would say to you that interfaith dialogue, which is duplicitous and deliberately has been undermined, has not worked. If we engage genuinely in interfaith dialogue, we will have to confront the rubbish that has been touted dogmatically for such a long time. My ancestors are not burning in hell. I cannot go around and rape and pillage and then at the end, just before I die, say, I'm a member of the church and be absolved of all of these things. These are the tough things that we have to face and then move beyond. And unless we do that genuinely, interfaith dialogue is a sham. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to get a woman to step forward because we've had precious few of you. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, as a woman would be a little negative. I came very positively, but I just feel like to say that I feel very disappointed that the title of this was "Who is my neighbour?" and given that the report that title came from is predominantly about how we respond to the most needy in our society. And what I've come to is something where I've seen people attacking each other's faith, attacking each other personally, and I've heard hardly a mention of how we are going to encourage our government to work together to support the most needy. And I thought that was something we could genuinely, as faith communities, come together. And I feel deeply, deeply disappointed as somebody who represents one of the poorest communities in London. My congregation would not know, and I'm not talking intellectually, what was being talked about. What they are concerned about is the fact that they are losing their homes, their jobs. This is not, I'm not making up political, there's no party at the moment that I know who to vote for, so I'm not making a party political thing, but I think it's deeply disappointing that I think we've navel-gazed today about interfaith and not thought about the people we're supposed to be representing.
Well, in that case, could I suggest that the church, could I suggest, and I don't care how unpopular this is, could I suggest that the Church of England should have produced a more intellectually rigorous and imaginative document in the first place? Because it's difficult to debate something so mediocre.
Without commenting on that, I have to say that today's programme was not entirely focused on the report by any stretch, and some of us, in fact, felt that the issue of extremism and entryism was equally concerning. So it's been a multitude of issues for which perhaps we can't apologise. It has attained rather a life of its own during this discussion. There was another question just behind, from the woman just behind you, and then if there's time, sir. Yes.
I've come from Lancaster, and I've been listening to your point, Judy, saying that just there are not right people at the big organisation who can give the right information. And I agree with Satish as well that it has got the caste law, which has got no meaning to anybody, and we all Hindu felt it, that who gave that information. And I also agree with Rakesh that younger youth is not coming into. The reason behind it, school is not giving, primary schools and they are not giving the children education, religious education. I'm also a member of SACRE, and we struggle to get into the schools and everything. What my think is, and what I feel there's a positive, taking up as why can't we do as an interfaith, all faith network, to talk to influential people who believe that we can do something about it and bring out some good, nice, projects or whatever you call it, and bring it forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that one. Yes, sir.
David Hopkins, representing the Spiritualists of Britain, and we're a minority group, and recently one of our members tried to join a local interfaith group and was told by a Christian member, when he asked could he join, the response was, over my dead body. So we're used to a degree of discrimination, but I'm also very concerned that I came along, who is my neighbour? We had a contribution earlier from a gentleman who tried to put forward the positive ideas and was very much put down by someone saying, well, we shouldn't ignore the negatives. Well, all I seem to have heard from most of the panel is the negatives without trying to explore the positives. And like the lady who spoke earlier, I do feel that there is a tremendous opportunity that though the institutions we may have at the moment do need reform. It took us a great deal of time to actually become a member of the Interfaith Network because of the prejudice against us. I do feel that much more emphasis should be placed upon the positives rather than on the negatives, and if we simply concentrate on the negatives, as so many of our speakers seem to have done today, we are not going to move forward.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to take a couple final questions, a woman in the back, and then we'll allow our speakers to make a closing remark and perhaps to address those along the way. Yes.
I'm Gita Sehgal, Centre for Secular Space, and I'm not usually involved with interfaith dialogues because I work with people, many of them from religious minorities, Christians who are being persecuted in many different countries, Muslims who are being persecuted by Hindus sometimes, and so on. And I work with atheists as well, and apostates who are being persecuted. And I don't think this conversation has been a negative conversation because we do need frank discussion of what has gone wrong with interfaith networks. I was the producer of the film The War Crimes File, which researched the case of Chaudhry Moinuddin. And I'm really pleased to hear you mention it, because that has been really completely wiped out of discussion. And what happened there was that there was a huge, massive social movement, let's understand this, of rich and poor right across Bangladesh in order to put the issue of war crimes on the table. Crimes that happened in 1971 and were suppressed, and it wasn't something that came from the top down. It was a social movement that led to the fact that he was convicted. And people in Britain, a few newspapers did report it after the conviction, but as you said, I mean, the interfaith networks have remained pretty solid, and these people keep getting back in. The Muslim Council of Britain is called non-violent extremist, which is an oxymoron in the first place, but it is a very violent political organization that has massacred religious minorities, Hindus, and anybody that doesn't agree with them. So we need that discussion. We need to understand it's a positive discussion, because people who've been fighting for years, including many religious people, imams among them, do not get a hearing in interfaith networks.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that comment. And perhaps yes, madam. Yes.
I know it's fatuous to say that if the government didn't spend so much money on X, they would have money for Y. It doesn't work like that, we know that. But to the woman who passionately spoke up for the poor of her parish, I would just like people to just be aware of just how much money is being expended on this industry. You have to read the Gatestone report to which Sheikh Mohammed referred earlier. And what worries me is that alarm bells are ringing, is that yet more money is going that way, in that the recent report of the All-Parliamentary Committee on Inquiry into Anti-Semitism emanating from events in the Middle East, they had a lot of good sound stuff in there and good recommendations, but one that set alarm bells ringing was, they said the answer to anti-Semitism was pouring more money into interfaith industry, well, they didn't call it industry dialogue, and in particular, they praised the Joseph Foundation and the Interfaith Network. And that really made me very anxious indeed, that kind of money is being misappropriated, which could be spent on proper social projects.
Yeah. Martin, and then we'll turn to our speakers. We haven't got, sir. There will be a chance to interact after the proceedings, but my role is fairly brutal, and that is to keep this to a sustainable length.
My question simply to each of the members of the panel is, what are the constructive ways forward?
Yeah.
Well, that sounds very practical, and you've brought it down to earth for us. If I could turn to each of our speakers. Sorry?
And I was going to offer you something on that.
If you could offer it in a minute, it would be gratefully received.
Yes,
sir.
I can do it in less than that, and that is, you don't need to know who I am, I could tell you, but in less than a minute. If you know about the evidence in the spirit level, then you will know what the solution is to all of the issues that we've dealt with here. And that is, if we create greater economic and income equality, and this isn't assertional, this is evidence-based, then straight away you deal with the problem in interfaith conflicts, because everybody's on the same level. Was that less than a minute?
That was pretty good, thank you. I turn now to our speakers, and if I could ask each of them in turn to keep it short, we'll go from Satish down to Judy.
A way forward. We have an Indian saying which says that humility is a good thing, but undue humility is near to crookedness. And also, silence is a virtue, but undue silence bespeaks of a deceitful mind. And so, contributing vocally and with commitment into this space is absolutely necessary. Until reason prevails, dogma will rule, exactly what has been going on for a long time. With regard to the comment that you made a moment ago, that it was over his dead body, I would congratulate you. You've moved so far forward. Not too long ago, it would have been over your dead body. So welcome. With regard to how do we evolve this, we are a family. This is like a tree. And there are many of us who spend a lot of time nurturing and watering this tree. But equally, we have to recognise that there are those who, for their own vested interests, are hacking away at the roots. And that's the only mechanism they have to continuously extort and embezzle funds from the public purse. And so it has to be fought on both sides. We cannot blindly ignore the negative and just blindly embrace the positive. We have to also balance it with a realistic approach to how do we tackle this. So I would say contribute into this space with honesty and integrity and without fear. That's the only way we're going to progress, all of us.
Clearly there's been another agenda about interfaith dialogue and the interfaith network and the interfaith industry here, about which I'm much less well informed than some of my other colleagues. What I'm conscious of, I think, is that just as with ecumenical dialogue, you can spend an enormous amount of time in inter-Christian dialogue not producing very, very much at all. What I am conscious of is that it's actually at local community level where people work together and engage in common projects serving their communities across the faiths as well as within them, that the people come together naturally engaging with each other in common service. And one of the things that interfaith dialogue seems to me not to do is always to be one that is projected towards service. There's a huge amount of talk in it. And one of the things that I think has changed as a result of immigration, it's very noticeable even in congregations in a diocese like mine, much more in London and in the great cities, is the cultural diversity within Christian congregations in the Church of England, which actually has been enriching. There's been not the slightest doubt that that's enriched us enormously. So that it's both the racial diversity and the cultural diversity that's led people to realise that they belong to an international church. Now, I think whatever happens after the next election, it is, of course, also up to us to engage with our neighbours. It's no point in imagining other people will answer the questions that we've got. Who is my neighbour is addressed to us. And of course, who is my neighbour? Well, that was, Jesus told the story of the Good Samaritan. And it was not just giving care, it was receiving care from a foreigner that was at the heart of that parable. Yes, we give. I think the spirit level is well worth drawing attention to. There's also what we receive from each other. And I think that the nature of the engagement that we make within our communities is absolutely crucial to building the nation. So I would start always from the local and build to the national.
I'm not surprised that the Bishop admires the spirit level, which is a brilliant but polemical left-wing tract.
Be positive.
I'm not going to be positive because actually the most positive thing about today...
I'd rather you were accurate.
All rather you be positive.
Well, I'm not going to... The most positive thing for me today is the negativity. It's the barrage of negativity about what you heard, because it's so refreshing. I haven't heard frank discussions like this for so long. And I'm so glad to hear... I'm so glad to hear a lady stand up and talk about the interfaith industry. That's what it is. And it's an industry that hasn't done very much to improve relations between faiths, just as the race relations industry didn't do very much to improve relations between people of different races. In fact, very much the opposite was true. If I had to just pluck out one thought from this fascinating afternoon, I think if there was one thing that's going to lodge in my mind, it was an observation of Judy's, which is based on her long experience working in education as an inspector, as a teacher, as a lecturer, which is that these well-meaning projects to start educating children about religion and about the differences between them at a very early level, or of course expensively funded by the taxpayer, can actually end up doing precisely the opposite. And one last thought. There's been so much worship of community, rhetorical worship of community, the local level, isn't it marvellous? Well, it was in communities. It was thanks to good community relations between faith leaders, the police, social workers, the local councillors, that children were abused. And I'm not just referring to Rotherham, but I'm also referring to Catholic Ireland as well. So please, can we just tear down that little tin god?
Absolutely. Well said.
Anything to say
Well said.
That was positive.
That is positive.
Well said. Well said.
Not in most people's thinking.
Fine. I'm not in the sort of room where I would expect it to be welcomed.
We need some positivism.
Well said. I would simply start with something I've said before, which is to cite the words of St Anselm to St Abelard, nondum considerasti quanti ponderus sit peccatum. For all your good intentions, you have not considered the true weight of human sin. And for those clerics in their dog collars, or indeed demanding respect for their imam's beard, you must respect me because I'm a Muslim cleric, you must respect me, and you must respect all the worthy things that I do. I would say that among the most disrespectful of religious leadership was Jesus Christ himself, actually. And so in relation to what this meeting for me is, people will come into this room with all kinds of different agendas. But for me, in asking the question, who is my neighbour, I would say very vividly, this is an extraordinarily positive expression of the solidarity across different faiths of people, my brothers and sisters, my Jewish brothers and sisters, who have suffered battering and exclusion because they've taken a stand to speak the truth. My Christian brothers and sisters who've lost their jobs because they've stood up and spoken the truth, criticising situations where interfaith leaders at the Cambridge Interfaith Programme, for example, have colluded or done dishonest or disrespectful things. The kind of response, "Oh, you're so negative," is exactly the kind of thing I get at Interfaith Network annual general meetings, because they will not talk about the collusion with Islamist extremists. They will not talk about the manner in which faith communities, unlike the heritage of this country that honours dispute and debate as in academic context, we're required to revere and honour and silence ourselves when it comes to addressing clerics who are doing nice projects on the ground. I would say that social activism, for all the good that it does, we need to bear in mind St Anselm's warning that we do not forget the weight of human sin, because among those people who are most engaged in good work in the neighbourhood in Hackney, doing wonderful things on tax evasion and challenging the City of London, all that kind of thing, are people who in their personal lives are engaged in abuse. And that's why the abuse inquiry will shine a very, very bright light upon that activist narcissism, where good works in the public domain become a cover for silencing criticism of religious communities, for silencing a full exposure into the ills of extremism and hidden agendas that obtain within religious contexts. And I commend this meeting as a really positive example of brothers and sisters. They're my neighbours, they're my brothers and sisters across different faiths who've had the courage to lose their jobs and to take a stand against this drowning down of our freedom of speech. Thank you.
Can I go back to what I started with, history? I'm 71 next month, so I'm probably the oldest person on the panel. If you want to look at what you can do positively in a society, look at Anne Applebaum's history of how Soviet dominance destroyed the civil societies of the countries it colonised at the end of World War II. Because it took civil society groups which were very, very diverse and very ad hoc and not government funded, and it made sure that people were controlled. Those societies were taken over and controlled by people with particular agendas. They had to talk about peace. They had to be positive. They had to get rid of poverty. All these things we've heard here. As soon as you hear those messages, go and read Anne Applebaum's book about what that did to the civil societies of those countries. I think that we need to look very, very hard at government attempts to inoculate, to harness religious bodies, to pick out people who are going to be the one voice. There's another historical parallel, picking winners. The government's putting out these bids for £400,000, wants to pick winners because it thinks they're going to deliver the ending of radicalism. On the contrary, it will promote radicalism. Read those histories. Be aware of the real history of this country. We need diversity, small groups. We need to be very, very distrustful indeed of those in positions of power who tell us that they speak for groups we know very little about.
Friends, you'll be delighted to learn that I'm going to close. I would like to close on an upbeat note, and not for the sheer sake of blind optimism, but simply to say that who is my neighbour as a question is a little bit of a ruse, because in reality it's not about the other, it's about us, and it's about what we can do proactively. And this space that we have inhabited together, a space of debate and of candid views, I think is a very positive thing. And going out there with a voice that is not veneered, apologetic, or linked to the industry must in itself be a good thing. I'm grateful for all of you and for the fact that you've come, spent your time, and invested from the heart. And I'm particularly grateful to the panel who've been strident, who've been honest, and truly evocative, if not provocative. And finally, Martin, thank you for doing what you do in terms of this organisation, the All Faiths Network, which is the, in many senses, the counterculture. Hopefully, it will stay that way. In many senses, the Antichrist. Hopefully, it will thus remain, but as a sacred space for the positivity, negativity, light and shade that today has thrown up in abundance. Thank you. Off you go. Going to straight to you.
Absolutely.